I was somewhat popular in school at the time, but I had around 4 very close friends: Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach. We went on many adventures together: camping, road trips, the beach, the whole thing. Noah's family was wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One summer, before 8th grade, we planned a camping trip. Lynn's older sister, Margot, and Zach's older brother, Todd, joined us, making it a group of 7. Lynn, Zach, and I were 13. Noah and Rose were 14, and Margot and Todd were both 17. We picked a spot about 20 miles from Noah's house, deep in the woods. There were no phone signals, and we were completely isolated. But we felt safe. These woods weren't known for anything dangerous. We arrived and set up camp with the girls in one tent and the boys in another. After a swim in a nearby lake, we made dinner and shared scary stories by the fire. Everything was going fine until Margot stormed up to us, annoyed. She asked whoever was messing with their tent to stop. We were confused because none of us had left the group, and the tents were far enough apart that we couldn't have been responsible. Todd shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a tree branch. Eventually, Rose and I decided to turn in for the night. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. I checked my phone, 2:15 a.m. At first, I thought nothing of it until I heard a soft tapping on the tent, and then giggling. It was quiet and muffled, but unsettling. The giggling sounded like a deep male voice, though I wasn't entirely sure. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and fell back asleep. At dawn, everyone woke up and decided to go on a short hike. We split into 2 groups to make sure no one messed with our stuff while we were gone. Margot, Lynn, Rose, and I went hiking while the boys stayed behind. When we returned a few hours later, we found the campsite empty. Todd, Noah, and Zach were nowhere to be seen. Margot and Lynn went down to the lake to find them, while Rose and I checked the tents. That's when we saw it. Our tents had been slashed. I screamed, completely startled. The cuts were small but deep, like they were made with a pocket knife. As I tried to process what I was looking at, Margot and Lynn came running back, the boys following behind them, looking panicked. Todd cursed when he saw the damage, but that wasn't the worst of it. His car tires had been slashed too. There was no phone signal, and the nearest house was miles away. With no way to call for help, Margot decided to drive Noah and Lynn to the nearest town to find a phone and call 911, while the rest of us waited at the campground. Todd, Rose, Zach, and I started walking toward the main road to meet Margot halfway. As we walked, I kept hearing branches snapping behind us. My paranoia grew stronger, and I finally told Todd. He nodded, looking more wary and constantly glancing over his shoulder. Then, Todd suddenly screamed, "Run!" Instinctively, I turned to look. 3 hooded figures were running toward us. 2 of them had knives that I could clearly see. They were huge, at least 6 feet 3 inches or taller, and well over 200 pounds. Their faces were completely covered by ski masks. It felt like something out of a horror movie. We ran as fast as we could, adrenaline kicking in. They chased us, but after several minutes, they finally gave up. We reached the main road, where we kept walking quickly, constantly checking behind us. When Margot finally arrived, we jumped into the car, locked the doors, and sped off. We called the police and reported everything. They searched the woods but found no evidence. No sign of the slashed tents, no footprints, nothing. It was as if it never happened. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if they had caught us. I don't want to think about it. All I know is that we were lucky to get away. I live in coastal South Mississippi, not far from Louisiana line. Everyone around here knows everyone in their families, so it's hard to duck and dodge people if someone wants to. But one place we can always run and hide from people is Bayou La Croix, and a road that runs through the swamp and marsh. It used to be a reservation for Native Americans. This story occurred in my later teen years or young adult years, when we would tear up that old dirt road with our trucks and ATVs. Unfortunately, many accidents happen on that old dirt road as well. One night, while drinking with some friends, the girl I was hanging out with at the time was trying to impress a boy, and he had a friend, so I was the improvised wingman. We drank straight from the bottle. One of the boys said, "Let's go mud riding." Me, being the tomboy that I am, voted for going. So did everyone else, and being arrogant, confident young adults, we ignored the obvious signs that the road was dangerous, especially while driving and drinking. I'd always heard that there was something dark about that road. The Native American burial grounds and cemeteries surrounding it didn't make it any less creepy either. I'd always heard around town that there was a territorial presence there that should be avoided. We never really believed it, though. We all piled into the Ford Bronco and went on our way. As soon as we pulled onto the road, I immediately felt anxious and uneasy and regretted my decision. The truck was sliding, mud was flying, and we were having a great time at first. Until we did a few donuts and came to a complete stop. The guy driving slammed on the gas pedal and we hit a pine tree head on. I smashed into the driver's seat and everything went black. I woke up to screaming and crying from my friend and groans from the boys. One was yelling, "We gotta get out of here." There was blood everywhere. One of the boys and my friend were absolutely smashed. My head was pounding. The pain in my legs was throbbing. There was an unfamiliar stench in the air. I looked up and noticed a pair of eyes locked on us in the darkness. The reality of what was happening set in. My pain immediately subsided. I said to them, "We have to run." The guy that wasn't driving had seen the eyes too, and he snatched my friend out of the truck. We all ran. The possible rattlesnakes, water moccasins, and everything else that could bite us were out of our minds when we heard the snarling and growling that was following us. Thankfully, we made it to the interstate where a random person drove us all to the hospital. Somehow, I made it through the accident without an entire scratch, just a little bit of a bruise on my head. My friend broke her nose. One of the boys had hit the steering wheel so hard that he bit through his own lip, and a lot of the other kids had shattered elbows and bones. However, I have terrible knees from slamming into the driver's seat, and I still experience side effects to this day. I don't know what lurks down that road. From what I've experienced, I believe it's what the locals call the rougarou, a swamp werewolf, if you will. I don't understand why I came out of that accident flawless. Well, almost flawless. I should have gone through the windshield because I wasn't wearing a seatbelt when we hit that tree. We hit so hard, the engine block almost became the dash. It's something that's been bothering me lately because I drive at night close to that road all the time. It's been over 10 years and a jail has been built in that area, but I still watch the tree line for those eyes. My wife and I went camping for the first time in Arizona as part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool spot on a mountain overlooking a breathtaking landscape. It was right next to a cliff and in a really isolated location, at least 20 miles down gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. We got there, set up our tent, hiked a little, and took some pictures of the surrounding area. A few cars were parked around the campsite, so we decided to talk to some nearby campers since we'd heard there was going to be a bad storm that night. There were 4 guys from Arizona who told us not to worry. The storms in that area never got too bad. That was all the persuading we needed to stay. Later on, while walking further down the campsite, we saw a woman with her dog and another lady. We smiled and waved, then continued our hike. Because of the storm, we were one of only 7 campers who decided to stay the night. As night fell, we watched the sunset, made sure our car was only a few yards away, and went into our tent when it got too dark. The storm clouds blocked out the stars, but it hadn't started raining yet, so we decided to try and sleep, hoping we'd doze off before the storm hit. The wind was intense, making sleep difficult, but eventually I managed to get some shut-eye. At around 10:30 p.m., I woke up to the sound of thunder rolling through the mountains and rain pounding down on our tent. I was a little freaked out because the area was prone to flash floods, and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff. I told myself to try and sleep, and eventually I dozed off again. Then, at around midnight, I woke up again. This time, I heard something heavy hitting the side of our tent, like someone was punching it and sliding something down the fabric. I opened my eyes, but it was pitch black. The sound continued every few minutes, and at this point, I was on edge. Suddenly, I heard slow, steady footsteps right next to the tent. My whole body froze. My heart was pounding so hard, I was certain whoever or whatever was outside could hear it. Then, whatever it was, let out a deep sigh on the other side of the tent. I thought it might be a bear and started mentally preparing to deal with it. Desperately hoping my wife could read my mind, I squeezed her hand hard, trying to wake her up without making a sound. Instead of catching on, she groggily blurted out, "What's wrong? Why are you squeezing my hand?" Right as she said this, the footsteps stopped. After a while, I managed to break out of my frozen state and whispered what I had heard. We convinced ourselves it was just an animal passing by, but the noise of something hitting our tent continued. We tried to rationalize that it was just pine cones falling from the trees above and attempted to sleep again. Then, a few minutes later, the tent suddenly caved in on my side, right onto my head. I whispered to my wife that something was pushing the tent down. My heart sank instantly. I feared it was a bear sitting on my head. Desperate, I pushed back, and we heard the same sliding noise we'd been hearing for hours. We finally realized that it was snowing outside, and the sound was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Relieved that it wasn't an animal, I pushed the ice off, determined to make it through the night. Just as we were finally calming down at 3 a.m., my worst nightmare happened. Out of the pitch-black night, we heard a woman scream. It was a full, terrified scream, followed by frantic shouting. "What the hell? Oh my God, what the hell?" Her words became more frantic and desperate, something like, "Help!" The way she screamed didn't sound like anger. It was pure terror. My wife and I stared at each other, frozen. I quickly shut off our flashlight, panicked, and whispered, "What should we do? How is this happening right now?" Minutes later, we heard her again. This time, she was screaming, "No, no, 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 no," as a car sped off into the night. My wife was in tears. We had no idea what had just happened. Then, silence, except for the icy rain hitting our tent. That was the breaking point. I could handle the bad weather, the potential bear, even the ice falling on our heads in the middle of one of the warmest states in America. But what I could not and would never be able to handle was the sound of a person screaming in terror in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m. We decided to get out of there immediately. We debated abandoning our tent and running straight to the car, but we forced ourselves to stay level-headed and quickly gathered our valuables before making a break for it. My wife grabbed what she could while I started the car, and while she ran back for the tent, I called 911. I told them what we'd heard and where we were, and they assured me they were sending someone to the site. The only problem? We were in the middle of nowhere, and with a storm, it would take them over an hour to get there. As we were pulling out of the campsite, my wife noticed one last eerie detail that still haunts me. The 4 guys we had talked to earlier, they were gone. All 3 of their cars had disappeared, but their tents remained. Whatever had scared them off, they had left in a hurry. Only as we were driving away did the most terrifying thought cross my mind. Whatever had been walking next to our tent that night may not have been an animal at all. It very well could have been someone lurking in the dark. Someone who had then gone after the woman we'd seen earlier during our hike. To this day, I still don't know what happened on that mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay.